I want to thank you all for joining us today. We're here to share a story about a global education crisis, but in particular in a proud and beautiful country, Lebanon. Today, you'll hear from Yanti Saripto, President and CEO of Save the Children, Jennifer Moorhead, Country Director, Save the Children Lebanon, hopefully Shireen McCarran, who's our Advocacy and Campaigns Manager in Save the Children Lebanon. She's trying to join us. And finally, Layla Strauss, philanthropist and longstanding partner of Save the Children. We have a big group today. If you're able, you may choose under view, the speaker view, so that you can see the speakers and the presentations. And we've set aside time at the end for a Q&A session, but please don't hesitate to use the chat function to ask any questions as they come to mind during the talk. And also, as I mentioned before, may I ask that you stay on mute during the talk to reduce the background noises. And we have a lot to cover, so let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce our President and CEO, Yanti Saripto.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, and in particular our colleagues in Lebanon, Jen, Shireen, and of course, Layla, thank you for your amazing, long-standing commitment, in particular to children in this country. I'm not going to talk to you for very long because I really think we should put the spotlight on our colleagues who know so much better than we do the situation for children in Lebanon. But certainly a global education crisis. In a week, my own kids went back to school last week. I'm sure many of you have children, grandchildren, children in your lives for whom going back to school was just a normal rite of passage. They got their new backpacks, their calculators and notebooks, and everybody went back to school. And, I was traveling last week in Ukraine, where it is very clear that going back to school is not actually what the average Ukrainian child is experiencing. There are some, absolutely, who were lucky enough, but many of them are not going back to school, not only after 18 months of war, but also after 2 years of a pandemic. So we're talking about children who have been out of school now for 4 years and counting. And that's also the situation that we're seeing in Lebanon. Lebanon has really gone, and Jen will talk about this, I'm sure, very coherently. It has gone from a country where we were dealing with, yes, the influx of Syrian refugee children, absolutely. Over 400,000 of them have never, ever seen the inside of a classroom. And that was the mainstay of our work. Then all of a sudden, the Lebanese economy, yes, an enormous crisis, in the gas explosion in Beirut worsened it, and all of a sudden the currency plummeting, and all of a sudden we're now working in a country where the whole country essentially has pockets of children, large pockets of children and families in real need. These children in Lebanon, whether they're Syrian refugee children or Lebanese children, they're not going back to school. It puts them at more risk of child labor, being put to work, puts girls in particular at more risk of being married off before the age of 18, and on it goes. Now, and Lebanon, as opposed to Ukraine, does not make the nightly news or the daily news in any shape or form, not in the US, not in the UK, not anywhere else. So we thought it was really helpful to actually put a spotlight on this country, really talk about what Save the Children is doing there with some amazing partners. I'm sure Jen will talk about that as well. And what we think we can do and should do much more of to help more children there get the education and the protection that they so desperately need. So with that, let me just pass it over. I'm assuming to Jennifer next.
You're muted.
Mute, Jennifer.
Yes,
mute.
yes. It's the oldest problem in the Zoom book. But thanks, Yanti, for that introduction. And I'm just so pleased to be with you all here today to talk a little bit about Lebanon. I mean, I've been here 3 years as director, and what an incredible and a beautiful country that I have the privilege to serve these past years. The country is just such a gem located in such a hard area and has suffered so much conflict, but it has been, you know, one of the jewels of the Middle East, the Paris of the Middle East, with mountains and skiing and the beach. I mean, what a privilege to be here. It has, however, also had its share of problems, conflict with its neighbors, civil war, as we all know, and of course the Syrian war, which really was a significant hardship for Lebanon. Since the Syrian war, as Yanti has mentioned, I mean, multiple crises, one on top of the other, has driven Lebanon into a kind of a failed state context. I mean, Syrian refugees now make up 30% of the total population of Lebanon, hosts more refugees by population than any other country in the world. The economic collapse in 2019 was driven by a profound corruption crisis, you can call it, and related governance crisis. There hasn't been a functioning government since then, but with the same sort of corrupt oligarchy in charge. The Beirut port explosion, as Yanti mentioned, has really driven the country into a state of ruin that is just unfathomable. It's hard to comprehend how Lebanon could have fallen so far from being a middle income country to a country now that is unable to deliver basic services like clean water or electricity to the children and families in this country. Children report to us an extreme sense of vulnerability. Poverty has driven them and their families into the most severe negative coping mechanisms. We call, the early marriage and children engaged in work, as Yanti was saying, children unable to engage in school because of economic reasons. Increasingly, they are telling us about their fears of drug cartels, criminal gangs, of extremist groups, of kidnapping. These are kids in every single focus group I have been to, have talked about drugs and kidnapping. This child protection crisis in this country is driven by poverty and is driven by a collapsed educational system, which is where we're going to focus today. But just a little bit about the situation of poverty and its impacts here. Over 1 million people, 1.1 million people, Lebanese, Syrian, and Palestinian, are in what is called an IPC Phase 3 crisis situation. The IPC is a fancy food security assessment tool, but this tool lets you know, that tells you when people are in a state of crisis. That means that families are cutting meals, reducing dietary diversity, and going hungry regularly. This is 33% of the Lebanese population and 46% of the Syrians living in Lebanon. This is a population in distress. The state of the educational system is so severe that 4 years, children have not attended a full school year because of teacher strikes, because families can't afford it. Children are leaving schools in order to work because they can't afford it. This is affecting over 1 million children in this country. These indicators that we see here in Lebanon are more indicative of like a conflict situation where schooling is frequently interrupted and high levels of school dropout. The cumulative impact on learning outcomes in 2022, for example, the reading proficiency for children in public schools was assessed at approximately 10 times lower than the average proficiency of conflict-affected countries, the top 15 conflict-affected countries, including severely affected countries like the Central African Republic. Lebanon has gone from the top in the Middle East in their educational system to the bottom globally. For example, another example, in grade 2 Arabic, only 1% of students in this country are reading at the proficiency level or above. Across the grades, teachers estimate that most students were 1 or 2 full grades below where they should be at the beginning of the school year. This is a learning loss that will take a generation to recover from. Over the last years, we have really been focused at reaching Syrian refugee children, but now we are expanding our focus, and we must be doing more to reach children in the communities in which they live, to keep children connected to learning, and enhance and increase our work with the Ministry of Education to support teachers and schools. Focusing on safe and inclusive access to education, including remedial learning and retention support. More broadly, keeping children in school is hands down our #1 priority to reach children, to protect and support children in this country. as Yanti mentioned, the crisis in Lebanon is a hidden one, not just because the media doesn't talk about it, because you can't see it when you are here. And this is maybe something Layla will mention when she speaks. It is a jewel, and there are more Lamborghini in this country than I ever expected to see in my life. But the hidden reality is that this is a state that is just in a downward spiral, with children bearing the brunt of this crisis. So last fall, we were honored to host some of our most important advocates and supporters here in Lebanon, and I'm very pleased to introduce you to one of them, our next on the agenda, Layla Strauss, to tell you more about her visit to us. Layla, over to you.
Jennifer, thanks so much for that rundown on the situation in Lebanon. To me, it's completely unbelievable what has happened to the country. And having visited there just last November, coming in from the airport in total darkness, having to worry about electricity usage, water, being very careful about water. I mean, what happened to this affluent, beautiful country is so shocking in the space of a few years. But I would like to share what was actually an unforgettable experience and a very positive experience in many ways. We were there last October. As my mother's Lebanese, I really do have a deep and emotional tie to this area. It's simply one of the world's most special and beautiful places, with a very textured and layered history made up of myriad peoples, very attractive peoples. And it's just tragic to see such a small country of 4 million people coping with an influx of 2 million refugees. And as Jennifer mentioned, now 80% of the population currently living in poverty. And the juxtaposition with the wealthier community is very marked, but we were obviously more focused on those in need. I think the thing that I was, apart from being very taken aback about the overall situation, one positive thing that I felt there was the work of Save the Children. I'm just so impressed with what their amazing staff are doing. They care so passionately about this work, and they're committed to uplifting all the children. And this is in the face of a deepening crisis. Obviously, they can only reach a small percentage, but the kids that we saw, their lives are so enhanced with what Save the Children are doing. And these are children, I have to emphasize, that are just like yours and mine. They are so beautiful, healthy, curious. What is so surreal about the situation is that these young people, a lot of them can't read and write. And this is the tragedy of the collapse of the education system. And yet they present so well. When Jennifer mentions working, some of them have to work a lot of them actually go to work in the streets, namely selling boxes of Kleenex or bottles of water and scraping together what little living they can. And yet when we visited a number of these children in the camps and saw some of the programs, I can't tell you how positive they were, despite living in this incarcerated situation. The joy and the hope is still there, and we have to do whatever we can to keep their frame of mind positive and upbeat. Actually, I was really impressed also by hearing from the parents, people just like you and I, who want what we all want for our children, which is a better future. The highlight of our visit, amazingly, was an a cappella concert of all things that we attended in Tripoli. We were expecting a simple concert in a rundown school, but were astounded to convene in a renovated Armenian cathedral to witness an exceptional performance by children of Lebanese, Palestinian, and Syrian descent. They were led by a famous maestro, a very charismatic, colorful figure, who had been an Armenian refugee himself at one point. And he founded the first a cappella concert ever in the Arab world. As a special surprise, his adult singers gathered from around the country to join the children in song. Honestly, hearing those singers sing Do Re Mi in Arabic and Michel Mabel in a cappella format by the Beatles was so moving. I was absolutely in tears. And actually the performance was world class. I could see them at Carnegie Hall. But that's what, unfortunately, we're seeing is lack of opportunity. And these kids should be out there regaling us with their songs and upbeat attitude. Knowing that the dire conditions that these children are living in, I just can never forget the sound of their beautiful voices in unison and the pride on their faces. They were so excited. This was the pinnacle of their world. And to be selected for the choir, which does serious auditions, is something that so many kids aspire to. We'll hear a little bit more about what's going to happen to the choir next, I think. Anyway, this is an opportunity that Save the Children made possible for them. And I would encourage you to help us in any way you can to make the most of these opportunities for these deserving kids. Anyway, I invite you to take a look at the video of our experience, and then hope that you might have some questions about what we can do in Lebanon. Thank you.
رح نطلع على المسرح متحمسين كثير. انبسطت لأنه جاية أمي وخالتي وأختي يعني. كثير حفلة عجبتني وتشكر الناس. كنت متوتر كثير أول ما بلشنا الحفلة، بس بعدين رتحنا وبعدين الجمهور حبنا. أنا مبسوطة كثير لأنه هالحفلة جدا كثير رائعة. كنت أول شيء متلبكة، بس هلا صرت مبسوطة ومني متلبكة. حسيت حالي إنه ماني هون بالبلد هذا، حسيت ببلد ثاني وكثير مبسوطة على هالحفلة.
It's the most beautiful experience. It's wonderful.
ميزة الأولاد كانوا موحدين أصواتهم، وهيدا أهم شيء، هيدا بيوصلنا على السلام.
Okay.
Shireen, would you like to say a few words about our programs? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I would like to build on what Leila and what Jennifer talked about previously, and to also give you a few updates about this year's plans. So basically this year we are also expanding the choir to include even more children. We have around 53 children on board from different nationalities, Lebanese, Syrian, and Palestinian. And we plan to create a documentary about the choir from the beginning up until the date of the concert to raise more awareness of the crisis and the work that we are doing. Through storytelling, we are planning to capture the transformative power of music and the resilience of vulnerable children as they find their voices. The documentary will intend to spark discussions on the critical role of nurturing and empowering vulnerable children and advocating for the provision of resources and opportunities, especially regarding education, to help them reach their full potential. I would like to share with you a personal story about a young girl that you can see in this picture. This girl is Ghenwa. Ghenwa and her family fled the war in Syria when she was just 5 years old, and they've settled in a Palestinian camp in Beirut. Since then, life has been extremely hard for all of them. Her father is not able to work because of a stroke, and her older brother needs regular medical treatment, which pushed Ghenwa to sell water and tissue boxes to drivers at a very busy crossroads outside the camp. And this definitely impacted negatively her well-being and her confidence and her access to education. She wasn't able to start school until the age of 10. So naturally, she struggled to keep up with her peers. And when the economic crisis hit, bringing electricity cuts and teacher strikes, she stopped attending school altogether. Ghenwa now attends a Save the Children Supported Education Center near her home, and she has learned to read and write. She was able to build her confidence and make friends and play with her friends. She's now more informed about her rights, and she's eager to speak up on behalf of children. And something nice that happened today is that we had a very important event today where we disseminated a very interesting participatory action research, and Ghenwa was actually there, and Ghenwa was able to speak about her experience, and she was also able to speak about the rights and what she's looking forward to in her future. If I want to bring a bit of spotlight on education and on the advocacy work that we've been doing, as Jennifer explained earlier, the situation is getting worse, with 1 million children at risk of losing out on learning for the 5th consecutive year. This year, we continued the efforts to further reduce barriers for refugee children, with a particular focus on the transition from non-formal education to formal education. At the same time, recognizing the current education crisis with schools that have been closed since the mid of January and no clear to long-term solution in sight, we are advocating for measures to ensure children's linkages to learning are not lost, as well as highlight the detrimental impact on children's protection and well-being when we're linking it to being out of school. Save the Children in Lebanon co-leads the Education Advocacy Task Team, and we are focused on advocating for the education sector's learning continuity plan. We are also working on a child-led campaign focused on education to raise the concerns of children directly to decision makers. So please stay tuned to know more about the campaign that we are planning to launch in the beginning of October. Thank you. Over to Jennifer, I think.
And unmute, please.
Thanks, Shireen. and honestly, the Renoir is just one of those examples. You know, it really is one child at a time when you're doing this kind of work. And Save the Children has been one of the major education actors in Lebanon, working with partners in communities in the most vulnerable areas of the country to really reach Syrian children, as Shireen said, that don't have a place in the public school system and that need to be reached in the communities that they live. We provide basic literacy skills, numeracy, also advanced learning for the older children. But all of this, of course, is just a small part of overall what is needed. There's over half of Syrian refugee children of school age are not reached by any learning program at all, and that was before this current crisis, in which we have such an impact on Lebanese learners as well. So we know what it takes to respond. I wanted to say to all of you before we move on to the Q&A part of this event. I mean, Save the Children has been in Lebanon for 70 years. Since 1953, we have been here on the ground working with children and families through the Lebanese Civil War, through the Syrian Civil War and the refugee crises related. And we know what it takes to reach the most vulnerable. We consult with children and youth all the time to understand their priorities. We have the evidence-based programs, the dedicated staff, the trusted partnerships to bring education to children. We know what we need to do, but we can't do it without your help. We know that you'll consider supporting our efforts to give the children of Lebanon a chance for the future that they deserve. And like Shireen said, there's more than one ways of engaging with us, and certainly the education campaign that is upcoming, we will definitely be reaching out to participate in this campaign to lift children's voices, and also, of course, the resources needed to deliver these programs to these most vulnerable children is so essential. So please contact your relationship manager at Save the Children to discuss more about this. And also, I will be in Washington in the middle of October if anybody would like to meet and learn more about the situation in Lebanon and what we're doing and how you can get involved. And on behalf of my staff and the resilient and amazing children that we work with and we serve, I thank you from my side for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, and thanks to all of our speakers for sharing your insights about the education crisis in Lebanon and what we're doing to address it. Before we open up for questions, I did want to introduce another of our partners who joined us on the Lebanon trip in the fall, Lorraine DePaulo. Lorraine, if you're here, do you want to share a few words about your experience? And you'll have to unmute. There you go.
I'm unmuted. I don't know if I can do this because this really blew my mind today. My husband and I work to give. That's our motto. We don't have children. And the two areas were children and paralysis because he was paralyzed. And so I wanted to find out more about each charity, you know, Wounded Warriors and Save the Children and Salvation Army. And Anne-Marie knew that I was Lebanese. And then when she called last October and said, Lorraine, we're going to Lebanon to visit the children. And just a couple of days, do you think you want to go? And I said, yes. And the yes was really for a dual reason, because we found my father's family recently, after all these years, in Kharboun, which is part of Lebanon. And so my niece Lisa, who's on this call, and I went, and we were blown away. I mean, I came back realizing, you know, I thought, well, you know, they go in and they save the children and they feed them and whatever. I had no idea of the depth of not just saving them, feeding them, educating them, clothing them, and in some instances, even trying to help them start a little business. The children were phenomenal. The parents were incredible. I mean, they had 10 children, 9 children, 8 children, big families, all Muslim, all with the hijab. And the children were just wonderful. And what impressed me was my husband, being an educator all of his career, was in asking the young, there were 2 tiers, and the older tier were like, I guess they were, you know, teenagers. And it was asked, what is your favorite subject? And to a person, they said math. And I said, you know, this is not just learning this is really, they're really learning something so valuable. So I am so hooked on Save the Children. I wish I could do it all over the world like Lila does, but I cannot. And so, being Lebanese myself, I just congratulate you, and I'm there. As long as I can, I am there to support you. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. And I just want to mention, when we were there and we met Renoir, the young girl that Shireen talked about. Yep. She was an advocate for children. She was incredible. I was thinking, I'm going to fill out an application to Harvard for this young woman because she can make it. She was incredible. I want to open it up now for other questions. And I see that a question has come in from Frank Vogel. And I would put this to Jennifer, perhaps. With a government in chaos, is there a functioning education administration that can work with Save the Children and others to see that the support goes to where it is most needed?
Thanks for the question. And I have to tell you that part of the hallmarks of a quasi-failed state context is that the line ministries, and the Ministry of Education included, is not fully functional, and in fact has such a range of challenges facing it that while you have some, the Director General, for example, is a partner that we can work with, but the ministry does not receive a fraction of the essential budget it requires from the national budget, which is essentially bankrupt. And it has, and in general, the donor community, the international community, including the World Bank, has stopped engaging with the ministries and the government of Lebanon entirely because of the necessary reforms that have not been enacted, and because the same leadership is still in power. So it's the same leadership in whom the international community does not have confidence. So there is no money going to the government of Lebanon anymore. So that we're in this strange situation in which the UN has picked up a function of governance, meaning the Ministry of Education's teachers are paid through a financing instrument of UNICEF, in a way that's done in many other locations in the world where the international community doesn't engage with the government. So long story short, what we do with the Ministry of Education is direct support to the ministry, meaning we do services support or strengthening services through development of new policies that we can do without financial contribution to the Ministry of Education, but we really focus our efforts at the community level, reaching children where they live, ensuring children are connected to learning in non-formal educational systems, and also doing everything that we can to ensure children are registered or enrolled in the schools closest to them. That's the way out of this educational crisis. They both have to happen at the same time, but at the same time, I mean, you're looking at a Ministry of Education that's incredibly weakened, collapsing infrastructure, schools that are so fragile that 2 collapsed on children last year and kids were killed in their schools. It's a very, very fragile situation. Yeah.
Thanks, Jennifer. And another question to you. This is from Joan Panagos. Thanks, Joan. Because of the extreme impact of the refugee crisis, as well as the economic downturn, not to mention the collapse of the Ministry of Education, how do you measure success?
We measure success through Renoir. She is our measure of success, of course. I mean, it's trite to say one child at a time, but actually it means something. I mean, and also, you know, it's really true that young people today are the people that will be running the country tomorrow. And that's really where every activity that we bring Lebanese, Syrian, Palestinian children and youth together to deliver something in common. Our child rights participation programs, our learning programs, our entrepreneurship and youth livelihoods programs, these things that bring these young people together have both tangible impacts in the sense that these are young people engaged ideally in work or in school, but also they report all of those intangible good things around citizenship and civic education and leadership and self-confidence that is so required here. So yes, it's a difficult outcome to demonstrate, for example, that kids are educated and then are able to join the workforce. That's really hard when you have a collapsed economy, but we can point to both learning outcomes in our learning programs, of course, and also self-confidence and positive, outlook for kids that are engaged in our other programs. And of course, the life-saving programs that we do, delivering clean water to households across the country. We run the largest clean water delivery program in the country in 2 locations together with UNICEF. We rebuild and reconstruct shelters for Syrian refugees. We deliver food and food security and cash to impoverished families. We have a really big program in which we try to reach children's needs across the board. But really the most essential is the education support and the livelihood support that address kind of those root causes that drive the child protection crisis.
And I guess, Jen, just to add to that, in terms of our educational outcomes in particular, what I always find so good about our work is that we do try to measure when kids come in to those programs. We measure them where they are, not assume that they're somewhere because of their age or even because of the years of school. We measure where they are, and then we measure them afterwards and see how they have moved. How have they moved up? Are they closer to their grade level reading, numeracy, etc., right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's no surprise that a child that's engaged in those kinds of activities are reaching the basic levels needed to join school. We're really good and we're very successful at that in our interventions work. In last year, in 2022, we reached 12,000 children with educational programs. That's a good number of children. It's not we were unable to reach all of the most vulnerable children, but each one of those children is benefiting from a quality learning experience for that first basic literacy and numeracy experience. Just this year, we've reached 23,000 children so far as our programs grow, and we really focus our attention on children in the communities in which they live. But yeah, we know what needs to happen at the community level. We know how we need to amplify our impact, do more with less, all those things that we've been talking a lot about in this very difficult financial climate as well.
Shireen,
yes.
did you want to add anything about maybe some other success stories from our programs that you've witnessed?
Of course, so basically also things that are very recent. So basically the education campaign that we are working on is completely child-led. The children are telling us that they want us to focus on education and their access to school and to learning opportunities. So we are developing all of the campaign key messages, the products, the advocacy key messages, and the communication key messages that hopefully you will see in the next month or so are all led by children and are all written by children. So this is by itself is a success story because we are working with more than 25 children from across Lebanon and from the different nationalities here in order to come up with these messages. And all of these children are part of our child rights governance. So they are already part of a process where they are building their capacities either in public speaking or in communications and in campaigning in order for them to really be campaigning for their own rights.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks. Another question has come in. Yanti, I was wondering if you could perhaps address this. Is there anything that's being learned from other educational crises and being applied across different contexts?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would agree. I mean, sadly, of course, we're dealing with a global education crisis, partly brought on by the pandemic and kids being out of school for a long, long time without necessarily compensating measures, online ability, etc. Right? So a lot of these kids are at risk. A lot of those vulnerable kids, girls, children with disabilities, children of minorities, are at risk of not going back to school at all, or certainly having the biggest learning gap even when they do come back. So Save the Children has piloted and innovated in the space for many, many years. We're actually running an intervention that we call Safe Back to School and Catch-up Clubs. So we get kids who've been out of school for whatever reason, conflict, displacement, pandemic, etc. And as I said, we test them where they are, and then we really have a very sort of intense intervention for a number of weeks with them, their parents, their schools. And that looks different whether you do it in Uganda versus Lebanon or versus Ukraine. But we try to use the same sort of measures, standards to understand, okay, where are they? Same assessment techniques, and then how do we help them get to where they need to be? And it is not just about, can we just cram more academic learning in a shorter space of time? It is also, how do we get them engaged? How do we do it in a playful way? How do we look at the social interaction between the children, their parents, the teachers, etc.? So I think that piece, catch-up clubs, and I'm sure Anne-Marie or the team can send some thoughts around that. We're trying to implement that now in a number of countries, adapted to those contexts, where it is, and it's being peer-reviewed, it's being tested in a randomized controlled trial way. So that's the most stringent evidence that we could have, and I think that's having a real potential to help address this global education crisis that we're seeing.
Thanks, Yanti. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Does anyone else have any questions? We have a little bit of time. Oh, I see something just came in from Luciana. Thank you, Luciana. The choir illustrated a great effort to bring children from different backgrounds together. Can you share more on the dynamics that exist between Syrian refugees, Palestinian refugees, and Lebanon's own population, and what we are doing to lift all children and increase understanding between them?
Serene, you want me to take that one? This is such an important question, and feed in when I am done. And this is such an important question because so much of what we think about is what drives conflict, at the community level, and social tensions that are so prevalent, especially when you have a situation in which you have such a large number of refugees hosted by such a small country. And in every activity that we do, those programs that bring these kids together in one group working on their same projects. This is was so evident in the activity today, where a child advocacy group was evaluating Save the Children and our performance in their participation. So they were telling to Save the Children, right, you do this really well, and this is the outcome on me, but this is what we need to do better in order to better engage children and lift our voices. It was just amazing. Syrian kids, Palestinian kids, Lebanese kids, all of them working together, and every last one of them saying the same thing, that they love working together and how much they gained in confidence. And every single child that sees a Syrian and a Lebanese and a Palestinian as friends and as colleagues or as comrades, that is a child that's going to be making better choices in a very difficult world when they become adults. And all of our programs are geared in that way. So we don't, we have tried to resist the kind of funding that comes into Lebanon that's very status-based. We call this as that you need to reach, 60% Syrian refugees and X number of host communities. And it divides the way that we respond to the crisis in this awkward and divisive, divided way. Now, because vulnerabilities are across the board, but also because kids work best together. We are very when we're working with kids at community level, that all children are participating together, and all families and all adults are also participating together. So many of our entrepreneurship activities, a part of our livelihoods program, have women working together, supporting each other. And these are Syrian and Lebanese women, part of the, establishing their own sort of food production companies and doing their business. And it is not exceptional. It's much more the norm than the exception. And that's just a question of approach and how we're working with communities. This racism, the exclusionary rhetoric, the inflammatory language is all political. It's very much political and politicized, with the political leadership gaining political power in different ways by using very, very racist, terrible language against, inflammatory language against Syrian refugees and also Palestinian refugees. But that's the strongest comeback to that is what we're doing with kids at the community level. It was so evident today. Oh my God, my heart. It's just a reminder of how important that stuff is. And we all know when we were young people, participating in the stuff that we participated in school, you were in the school play or you sang choir at church. I mean, every one of those things has played such an important role for us. And it's 10 times amplified with kids that really have so much, a lack of everything else, and how important and how powerful it is to bring them together. So really, it's the inspiration that keeps me going every day working with Save the Children. Honestly, it's just really beautiful.
Shireen, did you want to add anything on that topic?
I just want to quickly add that, especially also from today, it's very evident that children are not racist. It's the society that we live in that is racist, and how political this concept is. And when you speak to them, they are so aware of the situation, and they are so aware how do they want to fight it. So when you speak to the Lebanese children, to the Syrian children, and to the Palestinian children, they tell you that there's no problem between them. It's what's happening outside that is being forced on them, or that is being projected on them. But what is fascinating is that through our programs and through our interaction with the children, they get to learn more how they can push back against this rhetoric. And I think we really need to build on that even further. Thanks.
I have to say it was a exciting experience at the choir when we saw the concert, to see all of the parents in the audience all interacting together as well. And that, I think they've learned in many cases from their children, right? Syrian and Palestinian and Lebanese families who might have at one point looked at each other as the enemy, and they were all there together cheering on their children. So that was special too. Yanti, do you see that in other countries as well, that have Save the Children's success, like uniting children in spite of races, in spite of divisions?
Oh yeah, yeah, and we're always you have to be mindful of it in any context, right? Where can we? Because also you don't want to inadvertently make it worse by only serving one side of the population or particular groups in the population, however much vulnerable they could be. If you're seen to be being exclusionary in any shape or form, we quickly lose our credibility and legitimacy. So I think our teams are always, we do real assessments and analyses on the ground to understand how do we make sure that we're seen to be equitable here and addressing the needs of the most vulnerable. And it goes all the way, right? It also in terms of what do we look like internally in terms of our staff composition. We can't just look like one, single dimension of any particular country. So that the importance of our diversity and equity internally also plays a real role in that.
Thanks, Yanti. And I understand that a question, I'm searching on our chat. Joanne Leeden, if you're on.
I can read it up if you want.
Thank you. Thank you, Luciana.
Yeah, and there's another question that came up too. It
Great.
says, from Joanne, how active are community NGOs? And are we partnering with those? And how robust is civil society?
Yes, I'll just say a small word, and maybe Shireen, you say something more. But I mean, the civil society in Lebanon is rich and it is diverse. We have a large group of partners that are very much present on the ground and knowing what they're doing, both Syrian and Lebanese and Palestinian organizations, and some of them driving the very important and very big child rights agenda in Lebanon. We're very fortunate to be partnering with some of those, including Naba, our partner that was with us today, who's leading a child rights network called Manara that's present throughout the Arab world and was founded in Lebanon. We're very proud to be working with them. And they're also a Palestinian organization and one of the leading organizations that's responding in Ain al-Helwa camp. There's a major conflict happening in one of the Palestinian camps here in Lebanon, and they're really at the center of the response there. And we're very much with funding from our side, from Save the Children's side, our humanitarian fund it's called, is supporting us to respond to that learning crisis, educational crisis in that Palestinian camp, where armed groups have taken up positions inside 2 schools in that camp. Anyway, it's very much led and driven by one of our most important civil society partners. So really, we're fortunate to have such an incredible group of local organizations to work with, who are also advising us. And, as we work on our, what we call our localization agenda, our agenda that's really moving us to be much as we can, much more partner facing and focus on communities. So we're very fortunate here. I just wanted to say something about the U.S. government, but Shireen, did anything more about our partners?
Yes, so just really quickly to add on the localization point. So for the education campaign for this year, we are working with 10 local partners, and they are basically driving this education campaign. And because of this partnership that we have, we were able to apply for a good funding from the localization initiative. And the proposal was accepted in order for us to really be very ambitious in the education campaign. So this also shows a lot about how active civil society organizations are in Lebanon, and how we can share our capacities together. We are able to really increase our impact.
Yes.
Thanks, Shireen.
Same
And
thing.
Jennifer, yes, I will turn it to you. That this is another question that's come in from Janice Stanton. Thanks, Janice. Are efforts underway to get more U.S. government support? Are there any members of Congress who might be advocates?
Well, the U.S. government is a very important target for us. The U.S. and France are the 2 biggest players, as it were, 2 biggest influential international actors here in Lebanon. So it makes the United States very important for us. It's one of the reasons why I will be in the US and seeing Yanti and Anne-Marie and Mary in the next couple of weeks. And it's specific to meeting people in the State Department and USAID and PRM and with Congress members on the Hill to raise the visibility of Lebanon and to lift the voices of the kids that we are working on, and to say it's really just not acceptable what is happening in this country, and that this is what we need to be doing about it. But I'm very interested, and if any of you also are having recommendations of congressional contacts, we would be happy to receive. And although I have to say I've been out of the United States too long, so I'm not really over across my Congress people from Michigan, but but I will become so by the middle of October.
And I'm sure we can help, Anne-Marie, I'm sure we can actually help send some thoughts on that to this group, which Congress members we're actually actively engaging on these topics. I'm sure Christy will have a point of view on that.
Excellent. Thanks. Thanks, Yanti.
Yeah, I think there's a Friends of Lebanon congressional group.
Yep.
That we intend to make friends with.
Yeah, that's the aim. Exactly.
That's the aim.
Thank you. Thanks so much. We are coming close to the end. Do we have any other last questions before we wrap it up? I want to thank you all again so much. This has been a wonderful, conversation back and forth. Really appreciate you all making the time for us. I hope you found this to be enlightening and inspiring. And we want to thank you all for your interest and your compassion for the children of Lebanon. And we look forward to keeping in touch. So please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or your Save the Children point of contact with any questions. And or if you'd be interested in meeting Jennifer when she's in Washington, D.C. in October to learn more. Again, thank you all very much, and I wish you a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.